uh, end up putting it out for anybody who couldn't make it. Um, cool. So generally speaking, when it comes to pricing, it kind of depends like where you're at along the freelance pipeline. And oh yeah, Fuji is talking about networking as well. Perfect. We can cover that too. So yeah, as far as pricing, it depends kind of where you're at along the freelance pipeline. It should be no surprise that in general your rates will rise over time. But one thing I do see, especially relevant to like the industry now, is that like your rates will always flex a little bit. And it also depends like if you're working in a studio versus if you're purely freelance. But I'm going to assume, at least for the purposes of this, that we're talking mostly about freelance pricing, because it's also similarly applicable. It just changes a little bit if you're working under contract or with like a studio or something like that. So generally speaking, you've got two main ways of pricing work, which is going to be either lump sum or some variation of time based, right? So when we talk about lump sum pricing, it's also called like project-based pricing. And that's basically like the client says, okay, cool, I need whatever, an illustration for a board game. And here's what it needs to be of, and here's the dimensions and stuff. And you say, okay, great, that's going to cost X amount. That's an example of like a lump sum pricing. Versus one of the things that I see, especially with indie studios, sometimes they'll trend towards lump sum, but then like major studios or larger studios or individual clients, for whatever reason, sometimes trend towards time based. And time based, I say that specifically as opposed to hourly because it does change. If you're working with like studios, oftentimes they'll ask for a day rate or a week rate or sometimes a monthly rate. It's not always hourly. Sometimes you'll get hourly, and it's good to know kind of an hourly rate, but usually, from my experience at least, when you're working with like proper studios that want to pay you based on time, they kind of just want to like be able to treat you like a contractor in their system, and usually that comes down to a day rate. So, um, how do we figure that out? There's basically two main ways to figure out like what your hourly rate would be. And when we're talking about whether it's lump sum or time based, it really is more of like a presentation more than anything else because all of it's going to be based ultimately on your hourly rate. And so to figure out your hourly rate, usually what I will recommend is a kind of bottom up type approach, which means you basically start with like, okay, what do I need to make? Right? Like, what do I need to make to survive? And for a lot of people, that's not tons. It usually like you could basically work out like, okay, out of every week, I'm going to be working 5 days, and out of each of those days, I'm working 8 hours. I know my expenses for a month are whatever. It's going to vary wildly for people here, but let's keep the numbers easy. Let's say it's like $1,000. Actually, I might even do a screen share because I'm just throwing numbers out at visual people, and I'm getting confused. So, one second. Let me go ahead and pop a little blackboard up so we can write this down. Share screen. Okay. So let's say that we've got our um, hypothetical person um, needs to make in a week. Well, let's say they need $1,000 a month. That's like a very round number. So I don't know. That's probably not super realistic in most parts of the world. But for this person, they're lucky. They need 1,000 a month. So um, 1,000 a month means that we can then break that into roughly 4 weeks. So that would be 250 a week. This is a very low number, but that's okay. And then we can kind of break that out into days. In this case, it's 5 days, so that would be 50 a day. And then if you break that out into hours, that would be like eight something an hour. What would that end up being? Calculate it. Calculator. Yeah, so it's literally 625 an hour. Let's assume for a moment that you most of your expenses are covered, and this is your actual amount that you like need to survive. Um, One thing that I generally recommend, and that is unique to freelancing specifically, is that you are not going to be working all the time. And so you actually need to account for that. Um, if you've been freelancing for a while, you might know what your kind of average downtime is. You might know that you tend to work like whatever 9 out of 12 months, and the other three tend to be like looking for other gigs. If you have absolutely no clue how much you're going to be working in a month, then I would usually just double this. So that would mean then that you are working with, let's see, 12, 13 basically an hour. And what that means is that 6 months out of the year, you don't have to be working and you're still making your amount that you need. Now, obviously, there's like financial management stuff involved in that. But in general, that means that you're basically starting from, okay, I need to make 1,000 a month, and you can break that down into like, okay, that's 625 an hour, but I'm not going to be working 24/7, and I'm not going to be working necessarily all year. So we give ourselves a padding by doubling it, and then that becomes our base rate. Um, from there, it's not necessarily fun to be working like at the absolute bare minimum, like barely scraping by. And the other thing too is when we're freelancing, like we don't get the benefit of whatever, like healthcare or time off or any of those other things. So I usually say like take this number and then pad it a little bit. So let's say we make it 20 bucks. That's a nice round number. So for this hypothetical person, they would be charging 20 an hour as their base hourly rate. So we'll go ahead and say hourly. And what that basically guarantees is that as long as they are working 6 months out of the year, they will have everything they need based on their like what they need to live, right? For them, that's 1,000 a month. Um, and so that's a way of kind of working bottom up. Obviously, these numbers aren't like the most realistic, but it keeps it nice and round. So that's a way of working bottom up. And then what you can do is you can extrapolate this into your day rate and your week rate. And we can also use it to calculate per project quotes. So let's say for this person, they've decided, okay, 20 hourly is good. That gives plenty of wiggle room and covers everything. Awesome. So then how do we figure out things like our day rate? So for a day rate, I usually just keep it exactly dead on at the hourly rate. Because a day versus an hour is like kind of inconsequential, I would say. So we would just times this by however many hours we work in a day. So if we work an 8 hour day, which is a normal day, then 2 times 8, that gives us 160 for our day rate. Um, And then for a weekly rate, oftentimes it will help because the downside of freelancing is that the work is not consistent. So knowing that we have working work coming in for a longer period of time or a longer block is a really valuable thing, and we actually want to try to push for that, right? So what we can do is we can discount a little bit for our weekly rate. So if we have a 160 day rate, I'm going to pull my calculator back up because I'm really bad at math. 160 day rate times 5 days out of the week that we're working, that would make our like week rate be 800. But what we could do is if we're wanting to incentivize clients to go with like chunks of a week, for example, we can drop that a little bit because we ended up padding. We know actually we really only need to make 13 an hour, right? So we have some wiggle room. So we can afford to drop this a little bit. Let's say, okay, 160 day rate, but if you know you need me for a week, then let's call it whatever, 750. And if you know you need me for a month, we can take that and times it by basically 4.5 is your average month. So 750, 4.5. Great. That would be 3375. So maybe we drop it again, call it 3,000. And we can double check that we haven't discounted too much because we know that we've basically assumed that we're working 6 months out of the year for the purposes of this. And we know that we need to make 1,000 a month. So this number can't be lower than 2,000 at the base. And ideally, it's slightly higher than that. So this is great because if you give this to a client, it's in their best interest if they know that they need you to book longer periods of time, like, okay, we'll just bill monthly, or okay, we'll bill weekly or whatever. It gives them like a sense of progression. So it is incentivizing to book longer periods of time. And you know that regardless of what amount of time they book, you're more than covering your expenses. You don't have to think about it or worry about it. Um, So that's kind of like how you work that out. And then to take this, so this is our time based. If we want to go to project based, it's really the same thing, but just like behind the scenes, essentially. So if they want a project based or a flat rate or lump sum, I think is what I called it, then you can basically take it. You you have to be a little careful with lump sum pricing because the brief has to be extremely clear. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to get into iteration hell where you're not being paid. So usually for lump sum pricing, what you'll do is you'll take the brief, you'll ask any questions that you need to feel like you have a pretty good idea of how long it's going to take you, and then you'll actually end up padding that by another usually like 20%. And that basically covers you for more iterations than you thought. It covers you for like, oh, they actually had to adjust the brief partway through. It covers you for like, oh, I know we said we needed this asset to be 1920, but actually we forgot it needs to be suitable for ultra wide, so we need it wider, things like that, right? So for lump sum, you'll take the number of hours that you think it will take realistically. Um, plus like 20-ish%. And I would say this number is very dependent on how accurate you are about quotes. For me, when I was starting to freelance, I consistently underestimated, and most people tend to consistently underestimate. So if you know that, then pad it more, and pad it by 30% or 40%. Um, and just kind of keep track of roughly how long it's taking you on each project and make sure that your lump sum quotes are kind of sort of in the ballpark for um, what you're actually putting into it. So in this case, we can use our hourly. So let's say that we get a project that's going to be 10 hours and we are working with a 20 hourly. So that would make it 200, right? And then we're going to add 20% to that. So that makes it 240. So the quote we give to the client is 240. And that also means that if we have an extra 2 hours of whatever, it doesn't matter. We're totally covered. The downside of lump sum is that if this quote is incorrect and actually you have like 4 hours, then you're just kind of biting the bullet on it because I know some freelancers who will, when they notice that, they'll say, okay, like we reach out to the client, you say, hey, we're behind projection right now. So would you like to work with hourly for anything above the quote? And that's totally fine to do. For me, generally, I prefer to just be accurate, and if it takes way longer, then it takes way longer, and I adjust next time. And that's just, I guess, a kind of personal preference. The one exception to that is if they are making significant changes to the brief after the quote and that is causing the hourly to go up, then it's totally reasonable to say, hey, like the scope of the quote has changed significantly. So if we want to still work lump sum, then I can quote for the amendments that you're making as a new lump sum, or we can just go hourly for anything over the original quote. That way, it keeps everybody on the same page. It's good to reach out like as soon as you realize that that's happening. But generally, people aren't going to have a huge problem with that. It's just best practice kind of a thing. Because if you don't mention something, sometimes the clients don't even know like how much time any given iteration or revision is taking. So they'll just ask for stuff, and if you're always like, "Yeah, great," then they don't know that anything is going wrong, and it can lead to kind of a weird interaction with your clients where it's like, okay, you feel like you're getting underpaid, they feel like it's totally fine, and they aren't aware that anything's going on, right? So generally, that's how you're going to work with your like um, hourly, figuring out your rates, all that kind of thing. And then the other thing that is relevant is how you bill. So this is very much personal preference, but usually I'm just going to assume that somebody's either listening or watching this that has never billed before. And so the question comes up like, well, when do you ask for the money? And I know that for a lot of people, they'll ask for it up front, especially for like individual clients or small commissions, and especially for commissions where there is physical materials involved. So that would mean like if somebody's commissioning you for an oil painting, I know a lot of painters will ask for some amount upfront because they have to output those materials. And if the client then cancels, like you've still bought the materials. Generally speaking, for anything that's like a day or two, especially if I know the client, it's fine to just receive payment at the end. The other thing, which we need to talk about at a different session, or we can touch on it in this one if people are curious, but is like some contracts, specifically like napkin contracts, which are super duper useful because they're very easy. They're easy to make. You don't need like a lawyer to do it. And it just kind of keeps everybody on the same page about how things are getting paid. And usually, just the presence of any kind of paperwork means that you're much more likely to not have to deal with like payment issues because that paperwork is there and it just kind of, I don't know, it just like triggers something in the client's brain like, okay, we've signed a thing, so we have to make sure we're on time. We can cover that a little bit later, but for me, I always cover work with a napkin contract if it's over usually like 350, 300, somewhere around there. It's like, okay, we'll just do a quick little thing so that we everybody knows what we're doing, sign it, and then move on. And I know that I don't have to worry about like giving half res stuff. So for day, like short stuff, 1 to 2 days, usually it's fine to pay at the end, payment on delivery. Or sometimes you'll do like slightly before delivery. So a good example of this is you'll see with designers, oftentimes they'll give either low res or half res versions, like proof copies to clients, and then only give the full res version when everything has been delivered. I've also seen people watermark stuff, which works well, but I'm not a huge fan because it just makes the work feel cheaper for some reason when you're presenting all of your work in progresses with a watermark on it. So usually the ideal is like get a napkin contract in place so you don't have to worry about it, or do like essentially I would call them, it's like a proof resolution where it's like, hey, this is half the resolution or a quarter of the resolution that the final asset will be. So you're going to see some pixelation, but this is just so that we can work and you can kind of see what you're getting, and then I can get you the Photoshop files and full res and whatever else you need after payment comes through, and then we're all good. Um, for medium kind of length work, so that could be up to like maybe like 2-ish weeks. It kind of depends on your billing cycle, but let's say up to whatever, 2 days to 2 weeks, give or take. You're kind of looking at a longer period of time. Generally, it helps to have some up front and some at the end, because otherwise you run the risk of putting in 2 weeks of work and then something goes wrong and you don't get paid for that time. So in that case, sometimes it's like some up front, some at the end. I see a lot of people do like 50-50, which seems to work pretty well. Or they'll do like, 30-70 or something like that. But basically, it's like down payment. And what that does is it essentially covers you, the first part of that payment covers you for any supplies you need to get and the actual living that is required during those 2 weeks. And then the other 50 is still kind of a reassurance where the client can make sure that they're getting what they need and it's not like they're just giving everything up front. And then obviously there's also long projects. And if it's not like anything longer than 2 weeks, really, you should have some sort of a paperwork in place. But for clients that prefer like lump payments, sometimes it'll work to do a small down payment, something in the middle, something at the end, assuming that it's a discrete, like single project. So 2 weeks plus, actually, I'm going to say like 2 weeks to, I don't know, 2 weeks to a month, maybe. Um, Generally, you'll do like down payment, let's say like whatever, 25%. And then you'll want something in the middle, because going a month with no pay, especially considering that, like, I'm assuming that you're working this like full time, right? So a full month with no pay is tricky. So maybe you do 25% down, and then what does that leave us? 75. So call it like 35 in mid, and then rest on delivery. Um, it's good to have an idea of your preferred billing stuff. But then billing generally is an area that works really well to just adjust, and it's good, like it's important to make sure the client feels comfortable. If they're down to just pay up front and not have to think about it, great. If especially if that works better for you. But this is an area where you can kind of work with them a little bit, like, okay, cool. So I'm hearing that you, whatever, you don't want to do 50-50 over a 2 week span. Like, what if instead we go just time based, and I can give you my weekly rate and then we can just at the end of each week we can settle up. Or you end up with this kind of like palette of options for how they can pay you and when they pay you, and then also how much you're being paid. And it just makes sure that having all of this stuff ready ahead of time, you end up giving a more professional impression. It puts the client at ease oftentimes because like they'll ask how much is that, and a lot of artists feel pressure because they're like, oh, I don't want to overquote them. Most clients just genuinely don't know what it would cost. They're just asking for like, what is your rate? And they're happy and willing to pay whatever that is. They're just asking for your rate. So sometimes I'll see new artists like undercut themselves before anything else even happens. It'll be like, oh, that feels like a lot, so I'm going to discount it for them. Like, don't do that. Talk with the client, see what they want, work off of your defaults first, and then if they are like, oh, that's a little above budget, you can say, okay, no problem. Like, what kind of a budget are we looking at? And let's work together to either adjust the type of assets, adjust like the method of making them so that it takes less time, or we can take a look at some discounted pricing or whatever rev share, however you want to do it, right? So this is kind of your like base, that once you have that, so this imaginary artist here has this kind of 20 hourly in their head, which also enables them to give snap quotes, which is super duper important. If you are meeting a client, they're like, oh, like we have this other thing that we really wanted to do, like here's the rough quote, like what do you think that would take? It's always reasonable to say, I need to run the numbers and look at the um, I don't remember what to call it, like the project brief, right? And come back to you. But it's also valid if you know that the thing's going to take 4 hours. You can be like, okay, like that's probably going to be in the 80 to 100 range. And it just lets you kind of very quickly quote stuff out. Um, Hopefully that all makes sense. I think that's like the most of the how to price work. A couple things to note. If you are working time-based and you are a newer artist, meaning that it's going to take you significantly longer than an established artist to do something, that is something that you should take into consideration. Now, it gets a little bit tricky here because I'm actually not necessarily saying that a new artist should artificially be working for pennies or something. But what I am saying is like you have to consider from the client's perspective, if they have the option between like a brand new artist and a mid-level artist, and both of those artists are quoting them the same, uh like the same hourly, but it's going to take the new one twice as long and the work's going to be lower quality, then there's no real incentive for them to go with you. And so oftentimes what you can do is you can do something like, okay, well, here's my usual rate. I'm not as familiar with this type of work, so I'm down to give a little bit of a discounted rate on it, because I think it'll take me a little bit longer, and it works out for me because I get more experience on it, and you can get a deal on the art and kind of work from there. Or you can also just quote them what seems reasonable. So you can do a little research and see what other artists would kind of take for that piece of work. Let's say it's an illustration that you think is going to take you 12 hours, because you're just not familiar with that type of illustration or with that style or something. You're like, man, I think this is going to take me a while. You know that you have a kind of comparable hourly rate to other artists, and you do want to get the gig, then maybe you just quote based on the time that other artists would take, and then you can kind of eat the rest as, call it a learning experience, right? There's no right or wrong way to do that. It really boils down to an individual basis as far as how much to discount, or if you should discount, or if it's like no. For me, I have always been pretty pragmatic, which is like some money is better than no money. And so if I have absolutely nothing else on the docket at the time, I will tend to like do that, especially if it's something I'm not as familiar with. Like I don't mind working lower than these rates. Um, that's mostly personal preference. It's also because a lot of my rates are more padded. But that's kind of comes down to the idea of like opportunity cost, right? Where it's like if you have a full docket, then there's really no reason to be discounting your rates. Like either you add them or it's too much and they move on, right? But if you don't have a full docket And especially if you're starting out, you can kind of get some hands-on practice while being paid, then that has value for sure. And you want to make sure that you're getting the client a good rate for that. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a little bit fuzzier when we get to like a newer artist and like, okay, well, it's going to take me a really long time. Um, it gets fuzzy because it's really personal. Like it's on an artist to artist basis. At the end of the day, the thing to remember is just like it needs to make sense financially for the client. So if you calculate all of this and you're like, okay, I need to make whatever, I want my own house, I need to make $4,000 a month, and you calculate it out, I think that would be like 80 hourly or something. And then you're like, okay, I'm just good. This is my rate, right? Like that's a valid rate, but you're trying to compete with like mid-level and senior artists who are going to be quoting the same work with a better portfolio at the same rate. So you just have to note that you're making it less likely that you will get that job. There's nothing wrong with trying, but there's always a balance within like you kind of see where that ends up, where your number ends up, and then balance that against like, is that realistic for where my portfolio's at, what the client's looking for, etc. Um, I think it's pretty much everything I had to talk about pricing work. It's something that a lot of artists seem to get very stressed about, and I think it's just because it's a very biz dev type of thing. It's not artistic. It's much more like numbers and interpersonal relations, which historically we're not amazing at. But there doesn't have to be scary. You can basically do all this work ahead of time so that you kind of have these numbers available, and then you can confidently quote them, you can confidently adjust them and estimate them because you know that you are meeting definitely what you need. You know that you're hitting the marks as far as even if you're not working for part of the time, you're covered for if you get sick later in the year. And it's a much lower stress way of quoting and working. Um, cool. So I see a couple questions in the chat, which all of these look like excellent questions. So we'll get to them. But first, I want to open it up for any questions related to pricing your work, billing your work, quoting your work, anything like that. And I believe that I actually did enable speech permissions back in this thing. So you can feel free to type in the chat, or if you want to just unmute and ask, that is totally fair game too. He's asking, would you suggest putting rates on your portfolio or dealing with it on a per customer basis? That's an excellent question. Um, that kind of touches on the other type of billing, which this type of billing is like bottom up. You're starting from like, what do I need? And then you're basing it on that. There is also a type of billing which is top down. It generally only applies to more established artists, but the general thought behind it is like if you're an established artist and people want your work specifically, it's worth considering like what they are willing to pay for it. And especially if you're in some very specific niche, like where it's going to be fairly hard for them to find other artists doing what you're doing at that quality level, it's good to be able to have the flexibility to pad your quote, especially like if there's a studio that's coming that needs your specific style and they have a really tight deadline, so they need it ASAP, which would mean that you're going to have to drop other clients or like work overtime or something. It's nice to have the flexibility to quote them whatever you want. So as far as putting rates on your portfolio or per customer basis, I would say it depends on the type of work you're doing. For industry work, it's not super standard to put rates on the portfolio. Anything with, at least I can say with games industry, it is more common to chat, figure out the brief, and then give a quote. And you'll also see that, like, if you look at outsourced studios, they will never, ever, ever have rates anywhere. You have to talk with them because it gives them, and it gives, if you're the artist, right, it gives you a chance to get to know the client, to decide if you want to work with them. There's also the like, some artists will do the like, I don't really want to do this fee, where if it's a project that you're just like, I'm not interested in that, I don't really want to do that, and I have plenty of work, some artists will pad it to make it worth the time. I've done that before, where it's like, okay, like this seems really tedious, and I don't necessarily need the work, but the client really wants to work with you. It's like, okay, then here's kind of what it would be to make it worth my time. Um, the one thing that I have seen where people will put rates on their portfolio is for illustration commissions, specifically fine art illustration. So that means you're not working like board game illustration necessarily. You're not doing like games illustration or anything like that. It's more like for things like if you do pet portraits, for example, that might be something that's great to put rates on your portfolio because you can spam that portfolio out on socials and it gives people uh, an immediate kind of price point that they can work off of. Another way you could look at it is like if most of your clients are people who have not commissioned artists before, having rates up front it kind of lowers the barrier to entry for them to think about actually commissioning you. Because for somebody who has never commissioned an artist before and just kind of wants a piece of art, it feels very intimidating because they're like, I don't know how to commission an artist. I don't know how to talk to them. I don't know the normal process. And so for people like that, having rates up front, it kind of puts them at more ease because they don't feel like they're going to somehow like sign a contract and then they end up having to pay way more than they thought, and this isn't actually worth it, and whatnot. So hopefully that answers your question, Fuji. I would say it very much depends on your client base. Um, Keeping flexibility to quote as you want is very, very nice. That's another thing to consider with hourly. Like once a client knows your hourly rate, it's fairly difficult to raise it. You can do it, but it kind of has to be incremental over time, or that client might just kind of be pseudo locked at that hourly rate, and in future clients you raise it. So that's another thing to consider is like if you have flexibility on quotes, and especially if you're quoting mostly lump sum, you have more flexibility for, let's say you're starting to get more work than you can handle. It's no problem to just quote higher lump sums for each progressive project. Until eventually you're going to have people that are like, okay, thanks for the quote, but no, and that's fine if your docket's full. So I think that answers it. Having rates upfront on the portfolio just can remove that for some clients, but also can be a deal sealer for others. So just kind of case by case basis. Um, cool. Any other questions on the pricing, quoting, anything like that? All right. If anybody thinks of other questions, feel free to type them in the chat, and we're going to move on to some of the chat questions then. So Fuji also asks, personally, I'm curious about how to do networking as someone without any kind of foundation from university or whatever. That's a very good question. So this is going to be very highly biased information, and I want to put that disclaimer up front because I think that when we think of networking, the style that works best for you is going to really depend on your personality and what you feel comfortable with. Networking is always going to be more easy for somebody who's more extroverted. Um, so, big fat grain of salt on all of this. This is just my personal opinion on like networking. And in general, the easiest and best way to do networking is to not try to do networking. Just find people who are doing interesting things and ask them about the things that they are doing. So go to let's say you are wanting to get into games, rather than trying to specifically be like, okay, I'm going to go network. So you're giving out business cards and portfolios to each booth along the way, right? Like there's going to be a bajillion people doing that. I've always found that it's way more effective to go to a place where the types of people who you want for clients are, and then just ask them about what they're doing. So if let's say we're going to a Gamescom or something, find some indie booths and just ask them to tell you about their game. And they will be so stoked to do that. And then, like, you talk about the game and, like, actually listen, I guess, where it's, you hear, like, what they're working on. Let's say they're like, okay, we're making I don't know, top-down MMO style game. And we want it to be set in this kind of 2D, 3D universe. It's like, okay, that's really cool. How are you managing the 2D, 3D thing? Because that sounds like you have two different perspectives going on. What's your system for jumping between the two? And a dev will talk for hours on that. And B, it will give you an insight into the problems that they're facing and whether or not you can help to solve them. And oftentimes there will be natural points along that conversation where it's like, that's awesome. Like, I actually worked on something similar before, and here's how they solved it. Um, I would say basically, like, for networking in general, try to approach it as just meeting people and learning what it is that they're doing that's different than what you're doing. And don't think about it so much as like business networking, because it's very obvious when somebody is there primarily to network and nobody actually likes talking to those people. Oh no, I'm cutting out. Let me see if I can hmm, maybe stop the screen share here. Okay, we're back. Somebody give me, hey, there it is. Okay. Hopefully, hopefully we didn't lose too much. Um, but yeah, it's very obvious if you're there like just to network. So yeah, approach it from a perspective of like, how could I theoretically help this person on what they're already working on? Or if nothing else, just like, I don't know, see what they're working on. People are working on interesting things. I don't remember who, I should really know who the quote's from, but it's one that stuck with me a lot, which is like, I'm paraphrasing. Every man is my superior in something, and in that I try to learn from him. And the idea is basically that every single person that you meet has something that they're doing that they know more about than you, that is interesting, that is net new information. And you can treat it almost like a little bit of a game to find what that thing is. And those connections will always be the strongest. And then of course, sure, you have your portfolio with you or you have a card if they ask for it. But I don't know. That's always worked best for me when I'm looking at just trying to meet people. Other things are just like showing up to events that seem like they have the types of people that are either doing what you're doing or might be interested in what you're doing. So that can include things like events on servers like this, or yeah, like game jams or whatever. Most people are totally down and excited to teach you about things that they are interested in, and they will not look down on you for just asking dumb questions. So don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions. Um, I think that's everything I've got on that topic. The only other thing is like don't necessarily discount people just because it doesn't seem like they would be like a useful networking contact. You'd be surprised how much overlap there is between different industries, or even people in totally different industries, where it's like, oh yeah, like my brother is working on a game. Actually, he needs an artist, and now that you mention that, like, let me get you in touch with him, right? So yeah, I think that's the easiest way to approach it. It's just very, very open and just be interested in people. At least that's what works for me. Cool. Silly asks, I was curious about usage rights that are often negotiated between illustrators and book publishers. I know this topic always comes up when I talk with kids' book, magazine illustrators, but this never comes up when it's anything game art related. That's a good point. So a napkin contract can help with this, or just paperwork in general can help with this. When it comes to usage rights, generally speaking, if you, man, how can I paraphrase this? It depends, is the paraphrase. The reason that a napkin contract or another contract is very useful is because you can actually define to some extent how those rights are passed. Usually, what I will do in the contracts that I give to clients is a clause that's called all rights for limited purpose. So, what it means is, let's say, Silly, that you are approaching me and you have a game called Silly's World and you want me to do the art for that game. So there might be in the contract that we sign a clause that says like all rights of these items are licensed to the client for use in the Silly's World game specifically. What that does is it enables the client to know that they can use those however they want. So it's not a problem if they take textures that you've made and revamp it and put it into different levels in the game or something like that, but it gives you the option to like control licensing a little bit. So let's say then that the Silly's game team starts making like merch off of that, you can either set it up so it's IP based, where it's like, yeah, that's totally fine. Or you could say it's just for the game project, in which case merch would have to be licensed separately. Or let's say the Silly's game team is going on to make a totally different IP, but they want to use the same assets that I painted. Then that also is another opportunity where it's like that's a different IP, so the license doesn't necessarily carry to it. The reason it's so muddy is because a lot of that is dictated by the contract terms. And so it really depends. As far as copyright stuff, generally speaking, at creation, copyright is licensed to the creator. And this is all big general speaking. Generally speaking, if that creator is working like on the clock for somebody else, oftentimes those copyrights will go to them. And a lot of, if you like work for a studio, you'll see a lot of clauses in the contracts that you're signing where it's like any work done on the clock is the intellectual property of XYZ studio. So that technically means that you can get into issues if you work on like a personal project on company time. There's an argument that there could be some claims to that. So it's good to keep your like times separate and clean. And yeah, the easiest way is just in whatever paperwork you're giving them, um, very clearly define like how those are passed. And all rights for limited purpose is a very common clause. It's usually what I use, and I will usually license it to the IP because I work with indies and I don't want to like screw them. So it's like anything related to X IP is fair game. They can go nuts with that art. If they spin off and make a different IP, then they would have to relicense it if they're using the same art. And that seems like a pretty fair middle ground. Um, I think that that answers the question. All of this should probably have a big disclaimer of like, I am not a lawyer. This is just more or less anecdotal. This is what's worked for me, and this is based on just the research I've done, which is non-professional research. I can also say I've never had a problem with it. And I've freelanced for, well, it's not all freelance, but I've worked in the industry for more than 10 years, and I've never had any particular issues. Um, I'm sure that there's probably some ways to do it better, but that would be my advice as it pertains to that. Um, Also, usage rights can be a part of negotiation. So if they want, it's called exclusive rights instead of all rights for limited purpose. The reason I put that clause into the contract is then if a client comes back and says, okay, we want exclusive rights to this, it gives me an excuse to up the rates a little bit. It's like, okay, that's fine, but the project rate is just going to be a little higher because you're getting exclusive rights to the work instead of all rights for limited purpose. So it just makes sure that there's opportunity to talk back and forth and make sure everybody feels like they're fairly compensated. Um, Hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Rage Nord's asking, I'm doing art direction on an indie project for the first time, so I feel like I have a lot of questions. I don't know which one might be the more interesting for the group here. Some are related to the art aspect of the game. Some are more on the art direction job and knowing when I should rely on the team. I mean, I think go ahead and ask whatever you want to ask. That's kind of the forum for this. So, Rage Nord, feel free to
Uh,
ask whatever.
okay. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you just fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So then I will start with like the management question. Is like, as an art director, like a lot of people told me you don't have to be better at 3D than your 3D artist because it's his job, to be good at that specific point.
Mhm.
Yet, it feels like if you're not knowledgeable enough, you can't either guide them properly or like,
Yeah.
for example, if I know that I know that it's possible to transfer a rig and skin from a mesh. I'm doing 3D stuff, really. But
Mhm.
like I know it's possible to transfer a rig and skin from a mesh to another, but I don't know the limit of it. So, like for example, for the concept art, for now I'm doing concept art as well, but like someone else could be doing that, and like I don't know how to guide him. Like how far can you push a concept far from the basic rig, basic like human design
Mhm.
without like punishing the animator. So like, so the go back question would be like, how do I know when I should learn more about the topic and when should I rely on the team?
That's a great question. So, I think it boils down to a little bit of both. Again, this is going to have to be taken with a grain of salt because this is how I personally like to approach it, because I really like to learn. So, In
Mm.
general, like you should be able to rely on your team. And if you just don't know something and you're like, okay, I want to, you're talking about a concept that is off of a human rig, like
Yeah,
different proportions, like how far can we push this away from a human rig? A
yeah.
reasonable thing to do would just be to pull your, if you're the concept artist, that makes it easy. If you're not the concept artist, pull the concept artist, the rigger, and the animator into a call and say, okay, guys, here's the concept we want to push for. And I want to just get a sense from everybody if that seems doable. That's the easiest way
Mm.
to do it, because then each person can contribute their individual like expertise. So the concept artist can be like, okay, it's no problem for me. The rigger can be like, okay, I can adjust the rig, and the animator can be like, that sounds like a nightmare, but here's a different way to do it, right? And
Okay.
so you can kind of get that information. And then what I like to do is if I'm in a call like that, I will ask specific questions to try to understand. So let's say in this hypothetical scenario, the concept artist obviously is like, yep, I'm a concept artist, I can make whatever. The rigger is like,
Mhm.
yeah, I can use like a whatever, a quadrupedal rig instead. And the animator's like, no, that just won't work. Then it gives me an opportunity to say, okay, can you explain to me like where, like what parts of our workflow will break down if we stretch the rig like that?
Mhm.
And they might come back with something like, well, we use procedural animation, and these are outside of the variables that those bones can rotate. So it's going to end up with a squiggly, like we'll have broken joints, right? And so that gives you an
Mm.
opportunity to learn, like, okay, cool. What's the furthest we could push it? And then they might be like, okay, well, here's the actual constraints based on our rigging system. Anything within this is fine. And then you can pass that back to everybody else, and everybody's good. Or if it's something that's like absolutely necessary that you have to find a way to do it, then you can ask about, okay, what if we made a different rig? What if we approach the animation differently? And just kind of poke around, ask questions, and listen. You're not really expected to know everything as an art director. Generally speaking, your job is to make the visuals look good. And for me, I like to know as much as possible. And so anytime something comes up like that, I just treat it as an opportunity to learn directly from people who know what they're doing about it.
Yeah.
Um, does that answer your question?
Mhm. Can I? It's just like it's always like I like to dig in some project, but like sometimes I'm like just but time, time is
Of
is
course.
limited and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah. But also like I feel like it's always like more difficult on the like recently we're facing like optimization
Mhm.
problem. Like you want your environment to look as cool as possible and like have as much assets, to make it looks alive and such. And then
Yes.
you're like I don't even know like how many assets can be in my game without making it break, because like then you learn about
Yes.
like some optimization process, but like is like all the optimization part like some stuff that I should try to focus on, like dig more into the project.
It's a great
So
question. Optimization actually changes project to project because it matters like what the build is for. It matters where it's going. So like optimization on a mobile project, let's say it's a game for mobile, is going to look vastly different than optimization for like a PC. So the easiest way to deal with stuff like that, anytime that it involves a technical aspect, I usually just bring devs in as early as possible. The devs will love you because instead of just giving them a list of unusable assets and being like, here, make this work, instead you're involving them in the process and saying, hey guys, like here's kind of the direction we want to go. Here's the assets we have so far, and I want to see like how far can we push this realistically without making more I don't know what to call it, more like uh, dev backlog. Like, how can we do this while keeping your life easy? And the devs will be more than happy to tell you, like, oh, okay, well, what if we batch these, or what if we tile set these, or whatever. And so, yeah, again, it kind of boils down to just you bring anybody you think might be involved in solving that problem into a room together. And then as the director, you're saying, okay, here's the direction we want to go. How can we make that happen? And then you'd be surprised how much of an art director's job is just being quiet and listening. And then oftentimes it'll come to where there's like a couple different options that seem like they would work. And then it'll either be up to you or up to the technical lead to decide which of those to do. In general, I will tend towards whatever option seems like it is the fewest net new systems, because new systems have a way of like breaking stuff for no reason and like sneaking up on you. So if there's two options, so it's like, okay, we could do this like fancy new thing that theoretically should work, right? Or we have a system that we could just adapt a little bit to make the same thing work. Like you go with the simpler of the two. I wouldn't say you're expected to know all of that, but it does really help to understand the parameters for your project specifically. So that means if you are working on a mobile project, have at least a general idea of like what's the average file size for a mobile project, how much can it be compressed, what are the main considerations for mobile projects, what are the main types of builds. You don't have to know the ins and outs of tech stuff, but you just want to be able to understand, like if your dev comes back at you with a bunch of essentially technical jargon, you want to be able to at least have a general idea of what they're talking about so you can make decisions based on it. You don't necessarily need to be able to optimize and build the game yourself, right? There's kind of a balance there.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Does that help? I like Eigenspace's thing, bring an offering to the tech artist and pray. That's also valid.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, they're precious, but like, he's already like busy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. If they're busy, you just have to basically you make the best call you can, and then I like to run it by them. So let's assume that your devs and your tech artists are like slammed and they absolutely cannot cop on a thing. My recommendation would be like make the best informed call you can and then put it in writing and make sure that absolutely everybody sees it. Be like, okay, here's how we're looking to solve this. Here's the size of assets it's going to make. Here's why I think it will work, and then just kind of so you like populate to the team. Because then, in the off chance that it doesn't work, at least you can point back and be like, okay, like I ran this by you guys before we implemented it, and nobody said anything, so I assumed it was fine. um, so that's the like it's not the most ideal, but it's another way to do it because then there's a good chance that a dev will flag it if they're like, wait a minute, you're trying to put like 2 GB of assets into this, like that's way over our limit. They'll flag stuff like that as long as it's clearly laid out.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Where it's like sometimes a bit difficult is because we are a lot of juniors. Sometimes also like we have that we actually don't know at all where we're going with this. We have to try it, but like I guess we're getting better at like trial and errors on that point. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, with juniors, there's a certain amount of trial and error. That's why it does help to have like at least one senior on each team. That's not always possible. So you just kind of make do with what you have. If you have to do trial and error, try to do cheap trial and error. So test like the simplest version of anything that you're wanting to do to see if it will work, and then just try to ask as many people as possible if it seems like that will scale. um, there's not like a single one way answer for that. And a lot of this, there's a big asterisk of like it really depends on the project and it depends on the team and the timelines and the budgets, and like there's a million different ways to attack or approach these problems. I'm just giving you like the general gist that has worked well for me in my career. Hopefully it's useful.
Yeah, no, but like, I guess that's what I was looking for, I guess, because yeah, like when it's too specific, like it will resolve one of my problem, but then later on I will have another one that will feel totally different, and yeah, so I guess it's fair.
Yeah. I would just say don't be afraid to ask stupid questions frequently. Thank people for their time and listen to your team. And you'd be surprised how far you can get with just that. Especially like the let people talk and process the information before you speak, before you like put out other ideas and stuff like that. And oftentimes I find, especially on technical problems, I don't know what this is. This is like a dev thing. Having to walk through their process oftentimes will highlight where the issue is. So there have been calls where, like with some of the studios I've worked on, where artists and technical artists will ask me to come in and try to resolve a problem, and I will just say, okay, cool, like walk me through what you've done so far, what the problem is, and like how we're trying to solve it, and then just like been silent, and they've solved it by the end of the meeting. So sometimes your role is just to listen or just to be there. Yeah, Eigenspace says rubber ducking. That's a programming thing where you try to explain your code to a rubber duck, and oftentimes talking through it will highlight where the errors are. So sometimes just being there, being supportive and listening, and then sometimes you'll also be able to catch where, oh, actually that doesn't make sense logically. Like, let's take a look at that. And the same thing actually works with artists, where it's like, okay, this image isn't working and I don't know why. I think it's something with the lighting. If you also don't know why, it is actually totally valid to say, okay, what do you think you're seeing with the lighting that's jumping out as an issue? And they'll be like, well, maybe it's too cool and the shadows are warm or something. And you just start a dialogue and work back and forth. And generally, you can come to a solution, even if it's a problem you don't know much about.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Uh,
Let's see. I think I got all of the questions in the chat currently. I liked the budgets and deadlines will defeat any off the walls ideas. That's very true. Um, and yeah, just anytime you're doing something off the wall, tell literally everybody about it repeatedly, because then at least there's a paper trail. Usually, if you can very simply describe what you're trying to do and how you're approaching it, if you don't have the opportunity to talk to devs or talk to a technical artist, you'll be like, hey guys, this is the solution I've come up with. I think it's the best bet. Here's the upsides, here's the downsides, and here's how we're going about it. If you can please take a look at this and tell me if anything jumps out as a super bad idea, that would be great. Otherwise, we're going in this direction. And then at minimum, you're unblocking the team, you're working towards it. You won't always be correct, but usually it will not be like catastrophic. Ready. Open floor for any other questions. Questions, portfolio reviews, anything that's kind of related to the more I don't know, business side of art, I guess, is totally fair game for these. All right. Sounds like we're more or less good. So see a little bit of typing, but we'll give it a second. Well, while we wait for a couple last messages to come through, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you spending some of your Saturday with me. Hopefully, the time is okay. These are going to be going every week. So if you know of somebody who you think would get value out of this or who it would be useful for them to be a part of, or if you have other questions that come up throughout the week that you want to ask, really for between this kind of ask an art director event and then the open atelier, it should cover everything that's related to open ateliers, like art and the process of making it. Ask an art director is like art and the process of either billing it, using it, etc. Okay, I do see we have another question which we'll get to in just a second. So yeah, the other thing is it'll really help if you know of somebody. Basically, if you think that somebody would be interested in this, just let them know about it. That's the easiest way to keep making these useful, because the more people we have, the more questions we get, and the more questions we get, then the more useful it is for everybody. Let's see. I see a question from Safi. I actually just started working towards making a portfolio and trying to figure out doing commissions. Are there any general resources that might be recommended for that, which I could review, or general advice? Let's see. It's a good question. I think I need a little more information from you to give you a useful answer. So, what types of commissions are you doing? Are you doing like fine art commissions, like portraits of people or pet portraits? Are you doing like very specific, like fan art commissions? Um, what kind of commissions are you doing? And then another question would be, as far as making a portfolio and stuff, like how long have you done art? Like how confident do you feel in your art? Or maybe a better question would be like, what am I trying to ask? Basically, yeah, just like how long have you done art for? maybe is a good question. I'm gonna think here. Um, oh, Reginald, if you want to post some visuals of the game, that's totally fine. I'm actually hoping for that because it'll give a chance for, as long as it's okay with your team. I'm happy that's kind of the point. I'm happy to donate some time here because it'll give other people sitting on the call an insight into like what goes into making games. So feel free to do that. Just make sure it's not like NDA or something. Okay, Safi says, I'm hoping to do illustrations of characters, getting more serious about art since 2021, but only recently at a point where you're able to or ready to showcase abilities. Okay, cool. Um, let's see. There are lots and lots of portfolio resources online. I can't think of one off the top of my head that's like a super specific one that would apply. I believe Proco has some on YouTube. I think they have a video and possibly part of a podcast talking about portfolios and how to present them. So that could be useful. Other than that, at the state that you're at right now, you will probably find, or you'll be probably fine with just getting a simple portfolio together. And then general advice for portfolio is that you really want to just have your strongest work on it. So don't just put everything that you've ever made. You want to put like your best of your best of your best. And that also means that your portfolio will consistently be updated. But if you think about it, if you're sending, whether it's a link or a physical portfolio to somebody, you're going to have a fairly limited amount of time for them to see it and be like, yes, I want some of that. So you want to make sure that anything that they click on, anything that they see is like representative of your best work. Um, yeah, no worries, Kiwi. Thanks for swinging by. Safi also asks a specific question about commissions. There are two art styles you tend to do. One's more difficult, and I'm not interested in doing commissions in that style. Do I have any advice about showing the more difficult style without implying that's what my commissions would look like, if that makes sense? Absolutely, yeah. So the forum to do that would be like socials, basically, like social media or things outside of your portfolio. Because when we're talking about a portfolio that is specifically geared at getting commissions, then people are going to commission you for what they see in your folio. That's the goal, right? You want to show the folio to somebody, you want them to be like, yeah, I really want this work, and then you want them to ask you to make it. So if there's work that you don't want to make, don't put it in your portfolio. You could put it on, depending on how fancy you want to get, you could put it on like an ArtStation or personal site. You could also have like use, I think carrd.co, if I remember right, is like a very simple website builder type thing that will allow you to make like a little portfolio that's very easy to just give people a link. So you could make like a card site that has just the basic commission info for things that you're actually accepting right now. And then put on like a main site or on your socials, you could put the other work to showcase it. But yeah, I would say if you don't want to do commissions in a style, don't have those in your commission portfolio. Let's see, Rage Note says, stole it from a different art director. Okay, perfect. I'll pull that into my Photoshop here in a second, Rage Nord, and we'll take a look. It's a good way to keep it simple and separate. Nice. Fuji also mentioned if you're more into web design, NeoCities is a good platform. That's true. Or if it might not be applicable to you right now, but if you're wanting to build like a really proper professional site, Squarespace is a good one as well. It's pretty easy to use. All right, Reginald, let me take a look at this vibe here. Let's see what we got. I'm just going to pull it into Photoshop, and then we'll do a share screen for everybody. Alrighty, share screen. Perfect. Share screen is up. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, and it's totally fine to like steal/borrow because a lot of cheat sheets and art bibles and stuff like that will have a very similar vibe. So that's fine. Um, Simple versus complex. Paper shapes when you can. Less repetition in lines. That's fine. Offsetting, socketing. Yeah, this is fine. This is definitely tailored more at juniors. A lot of this is shape design stuff. So yeah, soften your edges by scale. The only thing I would say is if you're working with like really juniors, you could also include how to do this. So for instance, um, when we're talking about softening with scale or things like this, you could mention, I don't know if beveling, for example, fits your workflow, but you can be like, okay, an easy
Yeah.
way to do this is X, Y, or Z. Or, for when you're talking about like cut lines and stuff like that, you could also get into like, if you have really specific technical details like no booleans or yes booleans or things like that. That's another thing that's sometimes good to put in here. But a lot of this looks like kind of general overview design stuff, which is great. Um,
Yeah, and like when I shared it, like some people were like, "Oh, yeah, it's helpful and such." At the same time, like I guess a lot of this mostly applies to the concept art, which
mhm,
will be like oftentimes me as well, I
mhm,
guess. And but like uh yeah, how complex, like is this like some kind of thing where like, oh, usually you will go like way more in depth and like be like, oh, whenever you're doing for example like uh um sorry, like an interactive this object, like in your scene you will have like stuff like your plans, and you will have your jump pad, or you will have your explosive barrel,
mhm.
and you'll be like, oh, um, uh, like I have also like a rule for that kind of stuff, and I have a rule for that kind of stuff, or I have a rule for that, like
Mhm.
how many rules like are needed, and uh yeah,
Yeah.
in general, like should I have like a rule like for the level art, for example, like whenever you're like decorating a scene, take that and that and that in account.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense. So the general rule of thumb I'll follow for like cheat sheets or art Bibles are that you want to put things that routinely come up that you're actually having to address into them. So a good example is like if the artists are always nailing like the silhouettes and stuff for the jump pad, like this is good to have, but
mhm.
if they're always nailing it, you don't really need it in there. So usually you could have a cheat sheet like this where it's like this is a general stylization cheat sheet, and then you could have kind of a document where it's just things that are really, really specific to your game. So this is like overall, how do we stylize for this game? And then you have another document that's like, okay, I'm assuming that they're not worrying about stylization. I'm assuming they're not worrying about like the basics. Just are there any specific rules for our game world that have to be considered? And you'll just put really specific stuff in there. So that could be something like a technical thing where it's like anytime we have a jump pad, we want to make sure that we have an air current above it so the player understands that it brings them up. Or it could be something
Yeah.
like there should never be lighting is a big one because lighting
Yeah.
oftentimes acts to guide the players. So it could be like there should
Mhm.
never be an emissive over 50% on a non-core object or something like that. Something that's
Mhm.
unique to your game
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. Okay. So like I joined the project, and it was already made by three artists, but
Mhm,
uh, uh, like a lot of the environment was made prior to when I joined.
mhm,
And then when I joined, I was like, okay, I think we need to rework that and that. And like the lighting part is especially important. I guess I could show you some screen, because um, we have like, okay, so we have a sci-fi Egyptian vibe,
mhm.
like imagine 80s, but like fast FPS
Yeah, yeah.
roguelike. Okay, that's our pitch. And then like our three artists like neon, and she was like, oh, it looks cool, it looks sci-fi. So we have neon kind of all over the place,
Mhm,
and I removed some of it, but I don't know like how much do I remove, because otherwise like some I'll just share right now some screenshots, but like some of the environments maybe look empty or too bland or too dull
mhm,
without it. So sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I won't remove all the neon, but in same time, this issue of like if it's bright, then it looks like it will be interactive, and if it looks like if I have like lights all over the place, I struggle to make a sense of depth on my
Yeah,
scene.
definitely. So I can tell you what I'm seeing here, and this is obviously personal preference because I'm not totally plugged into your project, but I can tell you what I'm
Mhm.
seeing and how I would address it. Um, right now, you've got like lights and emissives tend to draw our eye, and also
Mhm.
high density detail tends to draw the eye. So right now, the first thing
Yeah.
I notice is that all of your lights and well, most of your lights and most of your high density detail is not on important areas. It's up along the top of the map, right?
Yeah.
And so some ways that you could fix that. Oops, what did I just do? Oh, I just set the opacity low. Okay. Some ways that you could fix
Yeah,
that.
actually, on your screen, just on your screen, we see a black screen. I mean, I guess it's for the part prior, it wasn't important because I guess like I shared the image, but like if you're
Okay.
doing paint over or
Thank you
stuff
for
like that,
letting me know. Give me a sec. Let me see what's going on.
um,
I wonder if I'm just going to share the full screen. That's fine. Definitely always let me know. Stuff like that. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see this now.
yeah,
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to pull the other image that you sent here as well, just so we have some stuff to work with. Okay, great. So yeah, that's the biggest thing I'm noticing is you've got a lot of emissive leading lines that are just not leading to anything. So for instance, up here, we've got these are super cool. They're also like some of the highest contrast items in your scene, and so it's flattening your image.
uh-huh,
What I would say
yeah,
is try to keep high density detail to a minimum where it's not as important. So an easy solution, for example, let's take this blue. And if we were to take these instead of these tiny little hieroglyphs, you can keep the neon if you want, but just make it like little lines or make it little grid marks or make it these like this type of thing or whatever fits your world best. But I would probably not try to do this repeating hieroglyph thing because it's just calling a ton of attention. The other thing you can do with
yeah,
emissives is you control how emissive that they are. So you can have either you can add like bloom on main areas and then no bloom elsewhere, or
mhm,
you can also just control like have these be no higher than 30% emission, for example, and these can be up to 70 because
mhm,
we tend to be drawn towards light. Stix Color also put a really useful readability graphic design cheat sheet. This remains the same. It's in the chat there. This principle remains the same whether it's in 3D or 2D. So let's see. If I was to grab like let's say a color dodge here, let's say we bloomed out some of the main part of this level here. So these hieroglyphs are much more pronounced. And then let's
mhm,
just we can still keep these back here because they're cool, but they don't have to be that bright. So these are still emissive, but
yeah,
I'm just going to knock it back significantly. Same thing with these guys. They're kind of cool, but maybe we just lower that like slightly. I'm going to put this to darken so we just affect the emissives. Okay,
mhm,
so something like this now, what we get is we're drawing the player's attention down towards where we want them to look.
yeah,
You see how this feels like it just brings everything down into the level itself?
uh-huh, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
that's the type of thing that I would look at because that lets you keep the feeling of the neon without it being distracting. Other things you can do is you can use like guiding lights. So for example, if this is something where the player needs to like go up this railing, for example, it's totally fair game to build lights in as actual like hidden guides basically. So you could have something like some sort of a design of emissives that do something like this, right? Where it's like almost an arrow.
Mm.
Stuff
And
like
like
this will
go
really,
up there.
yeah, that'll really jump out to the player and it'll just kind of help guide them through the level. Um, Other
Mm.
things like with these guys here, you
Yeah.
can, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, but it's just like actually like on some part I was hesitating between just like slapping some basic stone material to it just because they are either like not stylized enough compared to I guess what I was thinking of, or also like sometimes I was just because it's like some of the older stuff that were done prior to when I joined. So, but like and also like the blue and stuff like that, they grab a lot of attention. So I guess I see it
Yes.
now more.
They do grab a lot of attention. I don't think that's awful, especially if like this alleyway or this like hallway thing is where the player needs to go. I think it's fine to have them here, but maybe
Mhm.
you could remove these guys instead. Basically,
Yeah.
when you're repeating stuff, you just want to have there to be a point to it because otherwise they end up feeling like set dressing, but like
Mhm.
weirdly overdone set dressing. So something like this, then now we have more clear focal area. And if I'm looking at this from a player's point of view, it's like, okay, great. We've got this very clear path up and through. We've got a kind of focal area here or a point of interest. Those are all like great. It just kind of helps guide the player through the level. Um,
Yeah.
some of this is again like it's always a balance. There's some personal preference here, but those are things that I would consider. Hey, Rage, why are there long straight lines? Those are against the style Bible. That's funny.
No, but like the seesaw stuff where you have like a bump and a crease
Mhm.
and a bump and a crease and a bump and a crease, like that kind of stuff, like where we had some neons that was like that. So I removed the MSC from these neons so they don't look as bump and crease and bump and crease. Yeah, but like some stuff I tried to fix and some stuff I was like, yeah, but maybe I'm just like over exaggerating the problem, or maybe like if I remove that, I lose something else that might be valuable.
Yeah,
So yeah, I wasn't sure like exactly how to fix some of the problem.
makes sense. Yeah, well, you said that you do concept art as well, right? So one thing that can be really useful, and I do this a lot, is like it's a myth that the art director always knows what to do. Sometimes you have to test some stuff, and you can ask your team to test it, or if you really don't know if it's going to work, it's totally fair game to just pull it into a file and do this kind of thing. Like it's like
Mm.
super sloppy, but I'm basically just seeing if the ideas that I told you, right, would work. Like, does this actually seem to fix the problem? And then you can put it in a group and you can toggle and say, like, does this feel like it has a better flow or a better vibe? And then if it does, the added benefit is that you already have a ready-made file that you can just give to your level designers or level artists, and you can be like, here, let's tweak it this way. Six brings up a good point. They say it's tricky every time you remove old work that lowers the morale of the team. It does kind of
Mm-mm.
depend on the team, but it is something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's good. The other thing too is just from a purely work standpoint, like if you strip out a bunch of work, it's taking more time to make that level. So wherever possible, it's good to just try to adjust the work that's there without having to like fully revamp it. So that's why I'm doing things like lowering the emissives but keeping them there, because this now is no longer a problem. It's just a cool emissive thing, but it's not like really dragging the eye up off the screen. Um, other things is like paying attention to where the balance of detail is. So right now I'm seeing we've still got, even with me adjusting it, this line is still kind of
Yeah.
a lot. It's kind of
Co-
heavy. Um,
co-
so oh, go ahead.
No, because I was like, maybe then I just keep the neon for just like oh, if you can jump over, like it's clear how high you have to jump. Like maybe I keep the neon for inside the arena and the whole the place where player can jump. Like for example, like on the bridge and like on the side of the river where they're like, oh, you have to jump this high. Like it's here the
Yeah,
limit of the playable. I mean, before you fall, basically,
yeah.
and or before you have to jump, and maybe I just tone down like super low all the neon that are not on the player, like the playable uh, arena, I guess.
That would work. You could just turn them down. The other thing we have to remember, and this is just a general art fundamental, is that when you're talking about contrast, everything reads in contrast to each other. So, for example, if this light up here is reading as really bright and high contrast, I can add something that's even brighter and more high contrast somewhere else in the scene, and it will make that light feel less important by comparison. So an example would be like
Yeah.
if I add these lights in here, I'm basically putting lines down, like emissive lines down here to try to put a little bit more weight down below, if that makes sense. And I'm making this a double line so it feels like it's even a little bit busier. And you can see that pulls the attention down significantly. If we combine that with like maybe just making these emissives a little bit less punchy, then I think you can get away
Mm-mm.
with keeping the neon, even if you wanted to keep the hieroglyphs. I think it would still work. where we just tone this
Yeah.
down. It keeps the feel of the level, but now a lot of the focus is down in the level and on the focal elements. You can also use different colors. Like I see you've got these little doobly doos. I don't know if they're enemies or what
Mhm.
they are, but the fact that they're different
It's like
colors.
explosive barrels. You know, it's like the
Okay,
basic red barrels trope.
great. Yep, that's perfect because that the fact that they're a different color tells me there's different information associated with them, and the players will
Yeah.
figure that out as well. So yeah, so if we do something like this where I'm punching up the lights on the emissives down in the scene and I'm just taking them down a little bit on the ones outside of the scene, you can see how that really pulls our attention down quite a bit, which is great. It's kind of what we're looking
Yeah.
for. So that's
Yeah.
just one solution. There's lots of solutions to this type of thing. Sometimes the best way to figure it out is just to test it or to do it in 2D like this very roughly, and then bring it to the team and be like, okay, how do we feel about this? Because here's the problem we're trying to solve, and here's what I'm seeing. And now, like these guys feel interesting and imposing, but they don't feel too busy because we have so much more contrast happening down here, and we can kind of see our before and after. Here, my eye jumps up to this guy immediately. Here, my eye is jumping to the bridge and these kind of
Yeah.
leading lines to our destination here.
Yeah, because like the big shiny stuff on the background. Okay, it's like another problem that we used to have, and like that's what like I also like come to optimization problem is like we have some arena where we play, you know, and you clear a room, and then you go to the next room, and on and on, you know. And the issue is like it's supposed to be all part of the same place, you know, like you're in the inside of the like the necropolis of Anubis and and I wanted to have like I used to fail in the game that we're just like playing inside boxes because
Mhm.
of the layout of the map sometimes, just because it was like just like a square, kind of like this one, you know. And sometimes it was also like because when you look outside of your box where you play, you don't see anything, you know. You don't see anything like so. I was like, oh, maybe I need to create some kind of building that will be seen from different point of view depending on the arena you're on. So you're like, oh, I'm like close to that giant obelisk that I used to see far on that prior level. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes
So I
sense.
was
I think
trying
that's cool.
to make some kind of
I think that
stuff,
works.
but yeah, but like then we had like some issue of like optimization, but like I guess we are slowly figuring some stuff out on that part. I guess like instancing and such.
Yeah. Well, and it'll always be a little bit of a back and forth. It's tricky when you're coming into a project halfway. But I think you're taking like the right general approach. I would just say if you need to add new stuff, or for instance, if you can tell that your artist is struggling with the removing of everything, then see if there's another solve that keeps some of the stuff that they really care about in. And again, this boils down to that like communication thing. Like you can just ask them, like ask, what are your favorite parts of the scene? What do you feel like is really working? And what do you want? What do we want to like really definitely keep? And what things do you feel like aren't working or you're less tied to that we can play with a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
Especially in smaller teams, like that's totally viable too. You'd mentioned this feeling of things feeling like they're kind of a box, which I'm getting that
Mhm.
sense a little bit too. One thing you can always think of whenever you reach that is try to find places to push the z depth of your scene, meaning like having different elevations. So an easy example would be if I take this um, and I'm just going to scoot this so that it's now level, and the perspective is not going to exactly line up. But I'm basically making it so that we've got the water level is lower. Man, this is going to be tricky to overpaint. Okay, I'm going to do this real quick. This is going to be very messy, but it should give us a general vibe for what it's going to look like. So I'm basically making it so that the bridge leads more directly into our kind of area of interest. This also elevates our focal point here, and it gives us two different elevations to work with on the scene as well, which will help with it
Mm.
feeling like a box. So if we have this like this, this would just be more or less flat like this. And then our
Mhm.
water line would have to be lower,
Yeah.
and we would see more of these stairs going down as well. Stuff like
Mhm.
this can be really useful to break up that feeling of like, oh, I'm just in a box. Because whenever we have different um, heights of things, like now we have to go up the stairs and into another area, it just makes it feel like there's more kind of dynamism to the scene. Something else to think about. If you're running into the box issue, you can basically fix that by breaking up either the walls of the box or the interior heights of the box. Either of those are totally fair. Fair game.
Mm-mm.
This is a very loose overpaint, but hopefully you kind of understand what I'm going for here. If I
No,
toggle,
yeah,
we just lower that whole
I,
point.
I'm taking some screenshots along the way to just to get to remember like
Yeah, feel
some of
free.
the points that are yeah.
So that'll help, and we just break away a little bit from that box thing. You can do the same thing with your rim. So for example, if we imagine that this is our focal area right now. So let's imagine that our rim actually juts up behind these guys like this. And we would get our same kind of blue going on here. It's another way to kind of highlight something or make that feel less boxy, because we're literally breaking up the box, right? We're actually changing it so it's less boxy. And stuff like this is kind of just design theory stuff, but most of the time these changes are pretty easy to make in 3D, even if it's an established scene. And it'll go a really long way towards helping to kind of solve that problem. So we can see here versus here, this is starting to feel less and less boxy as we do this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What about game design, level design? There's a force sometimes pushing against what's ideal on an art level, changing elevation idea. Yeah, that's a very good point. Styx is mentioning that like it depends on the game. First person shooters, sometimes visibility and cover make a really big difference. Um, so this didn't read to me too much like a first person shooter. If it is, then you'll
It
have
is.
to
It is. It's
it is. Okay. So in that
it's a
case,
zoom like
okay,
kind
cool,
of.
cool.
It's like fast
S-
FPS and
so
but
then,
with roguelike.
oh yeah, go ahead.
It's a fast FPS with a roguelike element. So like the
Okay.
twist, kind of.
Excellent. So
But
then what we can do is if we're taking away cover or we're taking away high ground, then from a level design standpoint, we want to add it back in somewhere, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same place. So I'm just going to adjust this so that we kind of keep the vibe. So what we've done with this change here, we've taken away some kind of high ground on the bridge, right? Here, if the player was standing on the bridge with these barrels, that's a fairly defensible area. So we can add that back in. For example, we could have a little side area, let's say over here, where there's another set of stairs going up to a little platform that overlooks everything, for example. This again is going to help break up that box feeling. And I'm just grabbing some colors. This is a very loose overpaint, but I just don't want to make everybody sit here and watch me overpaint. So we've got some stairs coming up over here, right? And we can kind of tie this in like this. And then maybe we could also put, if we want the player to hold here, let's say that there's, this is a room where there's hordes or there's a big boss or something. We can even put little goodies there to entice the player and make it like more worth going up there. So examples would be like maybe there's an ammo crate up there or something. So it's like kind of on the way, but we have a little stronghold. We could put like boxes on it or something. So there's some cover up there, stuff like that. You can just kind of think about it from like a player's perspective as far as what is needed, what's useful, and when you're making changes to the scene, you can try to figure out like what am I removing or what am I adding that's going to make the actual gameplay different. And you can kind of that lets as long as you kind of consider that, then you can adjust accordingly if needed. So in this case, we lost a sense of high ground, so we could add a high ground back in, maybe with some little boxes or something for cover, and a little like ammo crate or something, whatever. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, I have the
oh
high
yeah, it
ground
does.
exactly. So yeah, this is just one way to solve the problem, but don't be afraid to pull stuff into like your own Photoshop and treat it like concept art and kind of like work out your solutions ahead of time or double check your solutions ahead of time. Because
Mm.
kind of making sure that it actually solves the problem first is always beneficial, because then you can go to the actual level artist and be like, okay, here's what I'm thinking. First of all, being able to send them a screenshot like this is really helpful because it's very clear what you want. But then on top of that, you already kind of know that it works. So it's not a guess. You're not like wasting their time.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I see Benj just joined. Hello, hello. Kiwi has an out of left field question. What advice do you have for making stronger connections when networking? Like when talking to other professionals, sometimes I worry my social skills have gone down over the drain over the past few years, and I just don't know what to say to other pros. I know it gives off student energy. Um, yeah, so we actually kind of addressed this a little bit earlier, I think before you joined, but it's a good to kind of rephrase or paraphrase. So you say your teachers keep mentioning calling art directors and other senior artists and asking to get coffee, but I can't imagine what I would even say if they say yes. So the easiest way to do this, or the way that I like to approach it, is it has to kind of start with like asking what they're doing, right? You have to have some shared something to work off of. But I like to find an area of interest and kind of drill into it a little bit. So, how can I describe? Like, for instance, if you ask like, "Oh, what are you working on?" and they say whatever, an Egyptian kind of roguelike FPS, it's like, "Oh, that's cool." And that they're like, "Oh, and there's tech elements." Well, that's very interesting, right? That's a blend of stuff. So then the questions start coming like, okay, like how is the tech involved in this world? Is this like a tie between the like Egyptians and aliens, or is this something different? Like what kind of guns are in this? So like obviously I'm looking at actual art, but like that's one thing that I think is interesting is like what kind of weapons are this? Because I hear first person shooter, so it's like okay, it's Doom like, so we've got our normal weapons, but what if we had like I don't know an Egyptian halberd thing, like a light sword, like Halo did, stuff like that. And I don't know. You just kind of dig into, you find something about what they're saying that you find interesting, and then the conversation will flow naturally. An ambitious friend of mine, Stick says, an ambitious friend of mine made 100 plus connections in 2 weeks on LinkedIn, and many seniors were spooked when he asked for digital or coffee calls. The most common question was, what does he want? Slash, is it a scam? That is very fair. I've had some of that. And usually I don't mind. If you're cold calling people, though, oftentimes I would recommend opening with like what you want from them. And the more personal, the better. So a pretty much guaranteed way to get like a coffee call with an art director, if you really want to, is like take a look at their portfolio, find something interesting in it, come up with a interesting or reasonable question to ask about that project, and then like have that be your context. So an example might be like, hey, I wanted to reach out because I saw your portfolio, I saw this project that you were working on, and I saw that you solved like this kind of very interesting texture. Like you talked a little bit in your portfolio about this shader solution where you kind of blended painterly and stylized with some interesting like mesh stuff. It just looked really interesting, and I was hoping I could get some of your time to talk about it because I just want to understand like how you approach that because it's a really cool solution. And coffee's on me. Like you're gonna get positive responses from something like that. You basically just want to show them like number one, you don't just want their money and you're not trying to scam them. Number two, you've done your research on who they are and what they've done. And number three, you have a genuine question to ask them and there's like context behind that. So um, that'll always get good responses. Active lead, it's better to steer design towards a team's immediate skill level or try to reach toward an ideal. That's another good point, Fuji. Or is it better to try to steer design? Yeah, I thought you said instead of trying to reach toward an ideal. Steer design towards a skill level for sure, 100%. Um, if you try to reach towards an ideal that your team can't execute, you are going to run into, if at very minimum, budget and time frame problems. At maximum, you're going to run into much bigger problems. So it's good to have an ideal in mind, but like, so we just went through this level and took a look at some ways to adjust it. There are a million ways to solve visual problems. Um, Part of what makes the art director important is that they can balance between like here's the ideal and here's what my team can execute. And this in between point, I think, is the closest to that ideal that we'll still be able to do on time and in budget with the resources we already have. So if in doubt, steer more towards your team's skill level. Don't try to like push them beyond what they can do, because that's how you get burnout. That's how you get things breaking. And that's how you get like technical debt, budget issues, time constraint issues, all of that kind of stuff. You want to kind of like balance the two. So you take their skill level and you push it a little bit. Um, Also invest in helping people at the beginning of their careers. You never know where they are in a couple of years. That's a good point, Sticks. And Benny says, from my experience reaching out to ADs or senior artists, um, and are more of a hoping they will help you. So, like Alex said, be direct, polite, and personal, and they might help you. I think it's equally or even more important to try to build friendships or connections with people on or just above your level. Yeah, that's good too. They can relate to you more, and the relationship feels more balanced. I think that's a more valuable network. I agree with that. Yeah. And some of that also is like, weirdly enough, teaching also helps to kind of create those connections and opportunities and networking and all of that kind of stuff. Like, basically, don't assume just because somebody's at a lower level than you at one thing that they're a lower level than you at everything. And really, truly, like, absolutely everybody has something that they can teach you. The trick is just to find out what it is. So I really believe that. So yeah, it always will boil down to just like be interested in people. Don't waste their time. Be genuine. Ask them questions. And if something arises out of it, great. And if not, you have an interesting conversation and wish them well. Fuji, does it feel like I answered your question on the steering designs for skill level? Perfect. Right. If there are any other questions, now is the time to ask it, and then I'm super excited that there's so much to talk about. It's awesome. So we'll give it a little longer, and then we'll call it if there's nothing else. This will also be happening every week, so feel free to formulate more questions. Bring them back next week. Having hobbies and interests outside of art is really good in general. Yeah, that's very true. Sometimes people don't want to talk about art all the time. Yeah. Being able to just target like, okay, like what are you interested in? And tell me about that, and why is that interesting, and how do you do it? Like, that always is going to be fair game. And the nice thing is that it's guaranteed to be a hobby or interest they're interested in, right? It doesn't matter what you're interested in. You don't have time for hobbies. Amazing. It's also good for art, especially as a designer. Knowing about the thing makes it far easier to invent. That's very true. For me, my favorite thing with the art directing is badgering the devs to teach me as much as possible. I think all of the technical art stuff is really interesting, so I will always take opportunities to help them out with problems, to try to understand what it is they're doing and how, to understand how the shaders work, to understand why something is set up the way it is. Like, I think it's actually really interesting, and stuff like that will help a lot then later down the road when you're in a different team and it's like, oh, actually I know how to do XYZ. So okay. Yeah, no worries, Safi. Um, I think we'll go ahead and call it there. So thanks again, everybody, for swinging by. I really appreciate you all hanging out with me. This is going to be happening every week. So if there are more questions, if there are portfolios you want to pull together, if there's topics that you're interested in, please make sure to either ping me or put them in the general chat or DM me or save them for next week. Any of the above is totally fair game. And yeah, I will see you next time. This is all recorded, so we'll have a recording going up, I think early next week for both of the sessions that happen this week. So if there's anything in here that we covered kind of quick and you want to be able to go back through and just double check, it'll be in the recording. Alrighty. Super glad it was useful. Yeah, no worries, guys. See you next week. Bye.